Live from Arlington, Virginia, this is Transport Topics Newsmakers, the digital interview series that gives you access to candid conversations between industry experts and a veteran reporter. Sponsored by Omnitrax. Here's your host, Dan Ronan.
We welcome you to the latest edition of Newsmakers from Transport Topics. I'm Dan Ronan. I'm pleased to host this conversation with leading figures in the trucking, freight, and logistics industries. We have a great guest today, and we'll be talking about a very important topic for the future of transportation and infrastructure funding in particular, the Vehicles Per Mile Tax, or VMT tax. The Senior Vice President of the American Transportation Research Institute, Dan Murray, joins us on the Newsmaker line from Minneapolis, Minnesota. Dan, it's good to have you with us. Welcome to Newsmakers.
Well, thanks, Dan. It's great to be here. I'm looking forward to a really interesting discussion on this.
Before we begin our conversation with Dan, I want to tell you that Omnitrax is the sponsor for Newsmakers. Their leadership has a short message they would like to convey to all of you. So let's watch the message from Omnitrax, and we'll pick up our conversation with Dan Murray on the other side.
Driver workflow, compliance, video-based safety, productivity, data analytics, routing and dispatch. Omnitrax brings your business into focus with one integrated platform for drivers, the C-suite, managers, and dispatchers. Since inventing the telematics business more than 30 years ago, we've broadened the scope of our solutions and brought them all together in the industry's most robust fleet intelligence platform, so all of your teams can be more efficient, safe, and compliant. Your company can be more productive, and your customers satisfied. Today, more than 15,000 companies turn to Omnitrax for reliable, configurable solutions that fit their business. The essential role of transportation and logistics has never been more clear. The journey to achieve your goals and drive customer satisfaction starts now. Omnitrax, driving smarter.
Now a little about our guest, Dan Murray with ATRI. He's their Senior Vice President. Dan has more than 30 years of experience with a broad range in the transportation fields, including trucking research, economics, safety, emerging technologies, and autonomous vehicles. He's the Senior Vice President at ATRI. He's responsible for managing the Institute's research, the testing, and evaluation. And he leads multiple national activities groups, including the U.S. DOT-sponsored Freight Mobility Initiative. Dan is actively involved in several high-profile transportation panels as well, and he's received his bachelor's degree, and I hope I get this right, Dan, from Gustavus Adolphus College in St. Peter, Minnesota, and a master's degree from Northwestern, and that's in Evanston, Illinois. Dan, thanks again. It's good to have you on Newsmakers.
Yeah, Dan, it's great to be here. And while the topic of VMT tax might sound boring and a little esoteric, it's probably one of the single biggest issues our industry is going to face over the next year or two as we struggle to find the highway funding that we so desperately need.
You kind of teed that up for me, Dan. We've heard so much about VMT in terms of a tax. What are some of the motivations? And then we're going to get deep into this ATRI report that your group put together. Why do we need a VMT tax, or why don't we need a VMT tax?
Well, it's a great question. I think everyone understands that we haven't raised the federal fuel tax since 1993. We've been gutting state and federal highway trust funds for years now. We've been transferring general fund tens of billions of dollars of general fund revenue over because, frankly, we're spending too fast. The needs are too great to basically rely on the trust fund. So everyone presumes that we need a new source of revenue. It's not exactly true because, again, federal fuel tax is extremely efficient. We spend less than a penny of the dollar collected just to administer the federal fuel tax. We spend 2 or 3 cents on the dollar to administer state fuel taxes. But at the end of the day, there's just this congressional recalcitrance. They just don't want to raise the tax. They don't want to raise any taxes. And it's even a bipartisan message. So our research advisory committee selected this as one of the top issues last March. Coincidentally, one of our stellar research advisory committee members is Mike Ahart of Omnitrax, and And so there's a perfect synergy here in this discussion today. But they basically said VMTs may be coming, even likely coming. Let's get our arms around this, and not just from the trucking industry perspective, but what is a VMT tax going to do for the entire country, cars and trucks alike?
And in the study that you're looking at, one of the things that you just talked about is the cost of administering a VMT tax. As you said, it's very cheap to administer the gasoline tax and the diesel tax. We know what it is. It's on the pump. We figured out the money goes directly to the federal government. The VMT tax we're looking at, you've got transponders and billing and credit card fees, all these other things that, anytime someone touches $1, it seems as though they want a part of that money as well. So that's going to make the VMT that much more expensive to administer, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, here's a dirty secret, Dan. You and I really aren't paying state and federal taxes. We see this price per gallon and everything is wrapped in there. But the truth is, the federal fuel tax is only paid by 270 businesses. The Exxons, the BP Amicos, the Coke refineries. There's only 270 entities out there that are writing a check to the IRS for the federal fuel tax. What we're going to do now, I guess, in this sort of vision of efficient tax and revenue collection, we're going to move from 270 payers to 272 million payers, which is the number of registered vehicles in the United States. So somehow it's going to be very easy to comply with the federal fuel tax because we only have to monitor 270 businesses, make sure they're mailing their checks quarterly. And then we're going to sort of evolve into a massive scale program that's going to monitor in near real time 272 million vehicles. And somewhere along the way, we're going to tap their bank accounts every quarter or every month and collect our vehicle miles tax. And it's going to be collected wirelessly and automatically. But the compliance and enforcement piece is going to be ugly by most definitions.
What could go wrong? I mean, collecting, the tax from 272 million, people change their credit cards, they change their bank account numbers all the time. If it's on an automatic payment and you change your debit card, then what do? I mean, there's all sorts of ways that we can stumble and kick our toe in the middle of the night on this thing, isn't there?
Right. Well, it's a coincidence, but the number of registered vehicles in the United States is not far from the number of federal income tax filers. And we have a small little agency monitoring that called the Internal Revenue Service. So we may end up needing another monitoring management agency on scale with the IRS. And again, that's just based on the data. What we did in our research, Dan, is we went and grabbed publicly available data sources, number of vehicles registered, number of vehicle miles traveled, the cost of these dongles that every vehicle is going to need. Those are about $50 a piece. You're going to have to plug in a device with GPS, collects up your miles, and then sends it wirelessly to some management firm. Those dongles at $50 a piece times 272 million comes out to be slightly above $13 billion just in hardware.
Wow. But a number of states, though, do use transponders and have used them successfully for many years. I mean, you can drive all the way from, I've done this before, from Breezewood, PA to Chicago, never get off the turnpike through 3 or 4 states. And at the end of the day, you pay your bill and you're done. Florida has got, tolling that they use transponders. It's out there, but what's the problem of taking that, what's done on a state by state basis, and make it a national system?
Well, I'm not going to put you to sleep discussing technology, but those are very simple passive and active RFID tags that stick to your window. They have no connection whatsoever to your vehicle engine. So these dongles are going to plug into this OBD under your dashboard, and they will capture the miles. But we also have GPS built in, because what the governments want to do, and certainly what they're doing in Oregon, is they want to charge you more for the interstates, less for county roads, more if you're operating in morning rush hour, less if you're in the afternoon or midnight. None of those RFID tags on any of the toll systems have GPS built into them. So you're in a fixed system, very easy to manage. But coincidentally, even those toll roads you just rattled off, Dan, they still have administrative costs that are north of 20%. So you have 0.2% by the federal government managing the federal fuel tax. And most of the systems out there that you're running, the toll systems, are 20 to 30% or more in admin fees. So we're going from a highly efficient system that returns most of the money back to concrete, pavement, bridges, and you're going to lose 40 cents on the dollar in administrative costs. So we're going to have to charge substantially, maybe exponentially more to get the same dollars back into the roadways.
Wow. Big money in terms of administrative costs then. And then let's bring up the topic that I know that is a red herring for many people, and that's the privacy issues. Because now, as you said, you're no longer just using an RFID, you're using something that knows where your vehicle is at. We live in an era, well, let's be perfectly candid, where people are very suspicious of government. They're very nervous about giving up privacy information. And now you're asking them to put something on their car, plug it in, that can track where they go. And a certain percentage of the folks just aren't going to buy into that, no matter how many safeguards you put in place. They're just not going to buy into it.
Right. Well, and so let me comment on privacy, because there's two pieces of that. But before I do, there are millions of vehicles out there today that just won't be able to play this VMT game. Number one, any vehicle made before 1996 doesn't have a dongle plug. So they're still going to be writing down their odometer and mailing checks in. Many people, believe it or not, surprisingly, don't have smartphones, they don't have Wi-Fi, or they don't have bank accounts, credit card bank accounts. So we've already documented in the research a certain percentage, but it's in the millions of people who just won't be able to play. But for those folks who are participating, there are really two privacy issues we're going to care about. One is Big Brother watching you? And if the government wants to develop congestion pricing, which controls what time of the day you're driving on the roads, and they do, and if the government needs to separate out the different roadways because they'll cost you different amounts, then they will know, as you just said, when I'm driving and exactly where I'm driving. And I say exactly, the resolution of the GPS has to be able to separate a frontage road from an interstate. And so we're going to have pretty clear resolution. The question is, for the trucking industry, will it be detailed enough so that I'm not getting charged for driving in my own terminal lot, in my own shipper warehouses? Because obviously I shouldn't be charged for that. So that is going to be the resolution. And there's going to be a lot of questions about, is the government getting too much information? The other piece I'm a little nervous about, Dan, is cybersecurity. If hackers can break into any corporate computer, large banks, and even federal government databases, this is going to be fair game. And now I'm accessing 272 million bank accounts, basically. And that information is obviously sensitive from a cybersecurity standpoint. That issue is completely untouched and unresolved by the government agencies that are promoting these systems.
Are there, with the preface by the question here, are there criminals right now who are probably out there licking their chops saying, boy, I can't wait till the VMT is in place because I'm going to figure out some way, and some guy is the proverbial down in his basement, eating Cheetos and sitting on a laptop somewhere. Are these criminals, are they thinking out ways to break in and get through the firewalls to get this information?
I don't think they're smart, like you just said. I don't think they're staging an architecture right now to do that, because we don't know enough about who's going to manage these government computers, private sector computers. I do believe there are some legitimate companies that are drooling over the possibility of a 40% profit margin just to pass money back and forth, because the 40% margin is what the Oregon DOT allows their contractor to charge. So I think there's going to be legitimate companies drooling over the opportunity. Imagine getting 40% return every year on your 401k. There's going to be a lot of players racing into that marketplace.
In the report that you came out with, you said that VMT is an extremely complex and expensive proposition for the country. And I think you made a pretty good case that is indeed the case. But the question is that we're struggling. We're really struggling as a nation to find the money to rebuild the infrastructure. And whether you agree with the Biden plan or not, and you think it's the right plan or not, I think all of us agree, and I think the research that you've done at ATRI shows our highways are really in pretty bad shape. The civil engineers just came out with a report a couple of weeks ago and gave overall a grade of C-, and roads, I think, were a D+. Our roads really stink.
Yep. Yeah, so we know we need infrastructure. The existing federal budget in the federal trust fund is about $33.5 billion a year. So that's what we need every year if we just maintain the roads we have today. We're going to need substantially more than that if we're going to improve the roads and bridges. So we need the money. The problem is we're moving way, way too quickly down this VMT path. We don't have enough information on costs, management, architecture, technologies, cybersecurity. What we really need to do, Dan, is spend 3 to 5 years developing the answers we need on VMT. And in that time period, we'll continue to rely on petroleum engines. We have lots of petroleum reserves in this country. We have a phenomenal system for collecting the federal and state fuel taxes. All we need to do is raise them, raise those taxes. And for the folks who are saying, well, electric vehicles are taking over, they're not really. We only have a couple million of them out there. The growth rate isn't even double digit. And all we have to do is tack on a registration fee so that they also pay for the roads that they're using and damaging. A simple registration fee that equates to what they would pay in gasoline, and we're good for another 3 to 5 years while we get our ducks lined up for VMT or whatever else might be coming.
But right now, though, Dan, if I go out and buy a Chevy Volt, I get, a pretty big tax break on that. I mean, lots of money, several $1,000s. And so we're sort of going against, we have been using the tax code in a policy way to encourage people to buy electric and buy hybrids.
Right.
We've been encouraging you that. Now it sounds like we're saying, well, wait a second, we got to get you to find a way to pay your fair share.
That's right, Dan. And people are constantly saying we're not paying our fair share, particularly in the trucking industry, but certainly among the cars. And there's no question electric vehicles pay zero into the federal trust fund and the state trust fund. What's very interesting about that policy conflict you mentioned is we think that we're just like zero emission vehicles. We're forgetting that electricity, the vast majority of it, is generated from petroleum related byproducts and commodities. It's natural gas, it's coal. While I'm a personal advocate of nuclear fuel, that's not a large percentage yet. So we're still moving pollution creation from the roadways coming out of the tailpipe to a large refinery fixed 20, 80, 100 miles away. So these are not pollution free. They're better, but they're not pollution free. So there's a lot of policy issues here that you point out that need to be resolved. Again, I'd really like that 3 to 5 year window, relying on an increase in the federal and state fuel tax, and then getting these very complex questions answered soundly.
Yeah, it's not like the energy is just magically created somewhere. It takes petroleum or in some cases wind and solar. Thankfully, we're getting more of that. But that energy, that electric power that you use when you plug in has got to be created somewhere.
Yeah, Newton's laws on thermodynamics just get in the way of everything today. And we're going to have to resign ourselves that we still have to create and use energy, and it's going to come from somewhere. And the cleanest thing out there, probably hydrogen, but we're 20 years away from that. And on top of that, nuclear fuel, awesome, but there's political concerns related to that. So yeah, we're going to need energy, Dan, and we're going to need more and more of it because the trucking industry in particular is getting bigger and bigger in terms of its share of commerce, GDP, et cetera. So these are questions that don't have an answer waiting for us right now today.
Dan, we're at the midpoint of our interview, and I want to reintroduce you. Dan Murray. He is the Senior Vice President at ATRI, the American Transportation Research Institute, talking about a very interesting study that your organization wrote concerning the VMT tax and what do you think the implications are of a VMT tax in terms of the long-range policy decision. Dan, early on when he came into office, Secretary of Transportation Pete Buttigieg seemed to be moving in that direction. He was talking about, an all of the above. We need to look at all available areas of funding. if you read some of the comments that the secretary has said in the last couple of days, it seems as though he might be pulling back just a little bit from his initial enthusiasm to a VMT. Do you agree with that?
Well, I do. I agree with everything you said factually. I'm not so sure he sort of reconnoitered and changed his mind as much as maybe he got a phone call saying, hold on a second, don't get ahead of the administration. And that's good because, again, we have to take baby steps with this complex program we're discussing. I think there's a lot of mixed messages between Congress, the White House, the U.S. DOT in terms of where this revenue is coming from. About the only thing that everyone agrees on is we need more money. The U.S. Chamber said, $1 trillion. Everyone's piping in with a number. Everyone supports, by the way, increases in the state and federal fuel tax from the AAA to the ATA to the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. It's a win-win if we were to move down that road, even if it's 3 to 5 years. We just need to convince Congress that this is the right thing to do. And my statements today, Dan, as you know, Atria is a 501c3 not-for-profit, are all based on the external data that's out there today. A separate independent party from Atria would ultimately come to these same numbers, these same conclusions that we did. I think we were just ahead of the game.
Dan, your report said that if we were to enact a VMT, that we really need a big nationwide public education program to pull this off, to help people understand how the program will work, that it'll be fair, it'll deal with privacy issues. We're talking a pretty heavy lift in terms of the educational process, aren't we?
Yeah, we are. And just so you understand the baseline, we documented in our research, nearly a dozen different polls and surveys that have asked people over the last few years, what do you think about the fuel tax? What do you think about tolling? What do you think about VMTs? And less than 25% of the people out there today support a VMT. Flip that around, and you discover that more than 75% of everyone prefer the fuel tax over a VMT. So you pretty much have to change the minds of a large majority of this country before you're going to get public buy-in. So that's a lot of work right there, not even thinking about how we connect the copper wires.
We're in the trucking industry. I'm at TT and you're at Atria, and this is the area we live and work in. What would be the impact of a VMT on trucking? We've got about 10 minutes left, so let's really drill down now that we've sort of set the parameters of what a VMT is and some of the questions that have been raised. What does it mean to trucking?
Well, it's a good question. And so what we did in the research is we took the vehicle miles traveled by the trucking industry today as posted on the US DOT's website. And if we said today, based on truck miles, we tax them about just under 10 cents per mile, we'd raise $16 billion for construction. But to raise the $16 billion, we'd have to charge the industry $27 billion. So we're nearly losing 50 cents on the dollar to collect it. And therefore, but that's based, and that would be a slight increase over what we have today. The reality is, though, whatever we end up charging cars or trucks, presume realistically we're going to double or triple that, because every infrastructure needs report says we need to double or triple, the federal fuel tax. And so whatever the final number is, we're going to end up collecting probably close to twice as much as we need in asphalt and concrete and bridges just to get that money in asphalt, concrete, and bridges. Very inefficient system. Hence, we need 3 to 5 years to come up with a better mousetrap, quite candidly.
Okay, but you're willing to, at least from what you're saying, you're willing to at least give it that 3 to 5 year window to see if this is something that can be done.
Yeah, we have to find a way not to pay somebody 40% profit margin. We need to find a way to get dongles that are $50 or more today down to probably $5. And then we need to come up with new sort of management and transaction fees. We shouldn't be paying Visas 5% to pay the state or federal government every month, losing 5% on the transaction cost, which is what we lose today using a credit card. So I think we really can find ways to make it more efficient. Never will it be as efficient as the federal fuel tax. But if we can get down to, say, 5 or 10% administrative costs, then we're getting the money back into the infrastructure, which is what this whole discussion is about. We need good roads.
Is the clock running though on that 3 to 5 year period, Dan? Because as you know, the OEMs, both on the vehicle side, the personal vehicle, and the trucking side, they've made it real clear that in the next 8 to 10 years, they want to start selling exclusively electric vehicles, and that the era of internal combustion engines for vehicles, they see this as a non-starter into the 2030s. So we really do need to, it sounds like from what you're saying, if we're going to go this much electric, we need to really get on our game and get this researched and get it nailed down.
Yeah, I'm a technology optimist, but I'll tell you, I think those are very, very aggressive timelines. There's a lot of things that the PR folks get out there. You know, we were all going to have this thing that you've never heard of called 5.9 DSRC. That was going to be in every vehicle. Even the U.S. government is moving away from that because 5G wireless, cell phones are so much faster. So the technology is evolving quickly, but the PR folks need to step back and get in sync with their engineers. I don't think we're going to have all vehicles produced electric in the next 5 to 7 years. I think that's highly unrealistic, which is what some of the Detroit headlines seem to be. So we're moving quickly, but we're going to need to realize that the program, the VMT program, cannot move as quickly as technology is moving, because we just don't have, again, the ducks in line in Washington, D.C. 50 state legislatures have to pass enabling legislation. And most importantly, even from a social equity standpoint, we quite candidly probably have to ban local communities from playing in this game. The social equity issues of some gated community, you're charging $5 or $10 a mile to keep, populations out, that is covered in our research. And it's a real opportunity or a real challenge if we let local jurisdictions, even taxing districts, all ride the coattails of a VMT.
Interesting. That is a question that when I looked at the report, I sort of said, okay, I get it. That's an interesting point.
There's 90,000 separate units of government in the United States that all want a piece of this pie, and we have to be really, really careful about letting the genie out of that bottle.
Your ATRI report comes at a time when there's a lot of discussion about transportation funding. The House Speaker Nancy Pelosi says she wants to get an infrastructure bill through the House by Memorial Day. And as you said, the Highway Trust Fund is in some trouble. Let's take a bigger picture at the idea of funding the highways then. The American Trucking Associations, the Chamber of Commerce, and other groups have come out in favor of a nickel a gallon gas tax increase for 4 to 5 years, maybe up to a quarter by 2025. Is that fit into what you're thinking should be the way to go?
Well, we did a highway funding analysis just 2 years ago, separate from this report. And in there we said, you're wasting your time if you don't increase it at least a dime and index it to inflation. Inflation's only 1.9% a year, but you add that up over a 5-year transportation bill, you're losing billions and billions of dollars. So a minimum of a dime, minimum indexing to inflation. What's really surprising is the highway construction index is probably 2 to 3 times more expensive than the inflation index. So we really ought to index it to highway construction costs, and then we start to make some progress. But no question, a dime or more indexed to inflation or some other external cost, and then I think we're going to start to turn the corner on these serious infrastructure needs.
Was it political expediency, and I may be putting you on the spot here, was it political expediency and, thinking, well, we'll come back to this in 2 or 3 years, back in 92, 93, when they raised the fuel tax? Did this just sort of get away from them? Other things got in the way that became more important, and here we are.
If you remember, Grover came up with that no new taxes bill, and it was a bipartisan, everyone was signing it, and somehow the ghost of that resolution seems to be continuing. So we hear people say the trucking industry can't afford 10-cent federal fuel tax increase, so we're going to charge you 25 cents in tolls and call it a fee instead of a tax. So we're really going to get gouged if they stick to this no new taxes when the entire industry, and I'm including cars, is begging for a fuel tax increase. We've never seen this before in the history of automobiles and trucks, a unified voice saying, please raise our taxes. And again, I'm only saying that with enthusiasm because that's what all the science and the data is telling us what we need and who's behind that.
I want to just change topics to one little area, though, but it's tied into this. ATRI does an annual study on truck congestion. Things got a little better in 2020 because of COVID, but there's still many roads. 285 in Atlanta. There's 3 of them in Atlanta that are in just terrible shape. 20, 285, 75. You've got the Spence Bridge in Cincinnati over northern Kentucky connecting that. You've got the entrance at Secaucus, New Jersey, which is a disaster. What am I missing here?
You're missing about 100 more bottlenecks that are a problem for the industry.
But I think I got the top 5.
COVID was really bad for the economy, clearly, along with the human experience. The best single indicator of economic growth is increasing traffic congestion, which is terrifying in and of itself. But we're all hoping we get back to bottleneck delays that we saw in 17 and 18 because it means the economy is roaring. And so the bottleneck is a good barometer for how well we're doing as a country and as an industry. Our only hope is to raise enough revenue that we can sort of not build ourselves out of congestion, but mitigate it somehow. And that's where the revenue comes into play.
Dan, I talked the other day to a retired investment banker in the Chicago area, and he's also a recovering politician, a 3-time elected mayor and an Illinois state senator. He's been very much involved in infrastructure for his 50-year career. He said that with interest rates as low as they are, that now is the time, especially at the state and local level, if there was ever a time for municipal bonds and a way to do this, figure out a way, work with your bonding authorities, take it to the public, get referendums approved. Do you see that as a way out of this mess?
Yeah, well, it's still debt financing. At the end of the day, I'd rather have the cash in the bank and write checks to the construction companies building the bridges and the roads. That's the very best you can ever do. But if you're not getting the dollars and you're not getting enough of them, then leveraging the money that is coming in for bonding is the second best opportunity because you're building now and you're paying over time. And as you hit it on the head, we're paying with a low interest rate. So bonding will be the number 2 priority for raising revenue if we can't just get a bold increase in state and federal fuel taxes or leverage what we do have for bonds. But either way, we got to get the construction going ASAP for sure.
Dan, I want to give you, as we wrap up our conversation, we come up to the 30-minute mark. Where can people find all of not only just the research about VMTs, but the research that ATRI does on all sorts of big, important issues in the trucking industry?
Well, thank you, Dan. I appreciate that opportunity to direct everyone to our website, which is truckingresearch.org. If you accidentally put truckingresearch.com, it'll still take you there. We have dozens, near hundreds of reports, all available free of charge, for the industry: economics, environmental safety, human factors, autonomous truck research. It's all out there. We'd love to have you peruse the website and sign up for our contact database, and we'll push the research out to you free of charge as it's completed.
Dan, again, it's been a real pleasure talking to you. I know that we will continue this conversation as the issue of VMTs continues to percolate and get debated and discussed, and ATRI has done some really great research here.
Thank you. And the last big thanks and call out to OmniTrax. They're great supporters of ATRI. They're great supporters of the industry. And we look forward to working with them and all our other partners in the future.
Thank you. In closing, we want to thank our guest, Dan Murray. He's the Senior Vice President from ATRI, the American Transportation Research Institute, for joining us here on this edition of Newsmakers and being so generous with his time to answer questions on this and very important topic. And we must also thank our sponsor, OmniTrax, for making this edition of Transport Topics Newsmakers possible. We appreciate their fine support. Going forward, we are planning many more of these Newsmakers in the near future. We'll have an announcement soon when and who will be our next guest and when the webcast will take place. This webcast will also be available on demand for viewing. Go to ttnews.com for more information about how you can catch our interview with Dan Murray. Again, I'm Dan Ronan from Transport Topics. We thank you for watching.
Thank you for joining us today. For more information on future episodes, visit ttnews.com. This has been Transport Topics Newsmakers.